Hi, everyone. My name is Daniela Sigia, and I'm Vice President of Development for Textile Waste Diversion and co founder of Black Ram Media Group. And Rose Rutherford is your professor at Humber College Business School, and she likes to have me come out during one of her semesters where she teaches business in the fashion section or the fashion faculty. And I come on and talk about the end of life portion of the textile reclamation industry or the textile industry. So we talk about used clothing coming from the residential sector. So fashion very much has an impact on that sector, and I usually come on every semester to talk about that. Now, this year, not technology, sorry, logistics got in the way, so I wasn't able to come down in person. So we decided that I would teach this class via YouTube. So then this way, it's available for a broader audience because this is an important class, but also more importantly, still available to Humber College students who otherwise would not get this information. So let's do that. So Ms. Rutherford gave me a list roughly of some questions and some topics she'd like me to cover, which will probably meander off into a few other things because these are kind of difficult to unpack. So, if you're in her class, you're definitely going to want to take notes because she is going to make sure you got it. And you'll have no excuse because now you can repeat it if you didn't, if you missed something. So, watch it and do your homework. Do your homework. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about what textile waste diversion does. So, we're technically a hauling company. We use the word reclamation. There are other industry players that use the word recycling. It's false advertising when they're doing it. Reclamation is the correct terminology to use for the industry that I'm in. My job is to divert textiles from landfill at the end of the day. So 98% of all textiles are recyclable. We'll get into the green tech stuff after, but 98% of all textiles are recyclable, and 85% roughly end up in landfill, even though they still have a reuse value. And in landfill, it's pretty catastrophic. What it does is it releases CO2, it leaches the toxins that were used in the making of the fabric or of the textile or garment. Even your laundry products, a lot of them aren't meant to rinse out. Anything that keeps stains or wrinkles away is actually a chemical that's absorbed into the fabric, and eventually, as it slowly erodes, it leaches this stuff, which contaminates the water table. The other thing is that textiles, some don't decompose at all. 100 years later, they're still sitting in the landfill, and other ones, even natural fibers, take about 100 years. The other thing with natural fibers in the landfill is, if all that wasn't bad enough, it's that natural fibers grow a mold that self ignites, which means it doesn't need the catalyst to start a fire. So it's actually a massive fire hazard. Anytime you've had flooding in a home, where let's say you've had a big pile of laundry sitting somewhere that you know what I mean, nobody knows about, and that got wet in the middle. Maybe the outside looked dry, but it's wet at the bottom or in the middle. That is a massive fire hazard for your home. So now imagine that on a grand scale. And when we're talking about scale, how much clothes is Canada throwing in the landfill? About the equivalent of 3 Sky Domes. The Toronto Sky Dome, picture 3 of those, is going to landfill. 98% of that has a reuse value. So you guys are business students. This stuff could all currently be resold, even if we didn't do one stitch of investment in green tech. 98% of that stuff has a reuse value. Even sewing scraps are sold to cat toy manufacturers. So to send this stuff to a landfill to just sit there and contaminate our water table, it's not just that it's environmentally irresponsible, it's that it's stupid economically. Stupid, just to have this valuable resource sitting in a landfill where we could sell it, okay, and contribute to our economy, which is getting more difficult for other reasons we'll unpack going forward. But it's a valuable resource that right now is just sitting in a landfill, which is dumb. And in some countries, they've gotten so far as to get so good with their textile diversion that then now they're sending in machinery to landfills. They actually have sensors that can pull out nylon fibers and pull that out because they can resell it. So this is stuff that if we can harness this, so given that 85% of what Canada is disposing of is going to landfill, if we can add this to the already billion-dollar industry that exists around used clothing as an export commodity, and plus research and develop green tech, wow, right? We have a whole new manufacturing sector just waiting to be made. My dog is about to bark, and I just want to give you a warning that I'm filming this from my home. So I have two Dobermans that think they're on duty all the time. So if there's barking, I'm asking for forgiveness. There we go. I knew it. I could feel it in advance. So textile waste diversion, what we do is we started with this massive infrastructure that we built. My family's been in the industry for 20 years. So we had something like 2,000 bins at one point in the field. And we would usually partner with one charity, you know what I mean, and cut them a big check every year and call it a day. And we were hearing that there were a lot of small grassroots charities that just didn't have the money to get involved in the industry. So big flashy charities that were funded by the big Goliath thrift store brands in Canada, you know, they were being supported for the infrastructure, but small grassroots charities weren't. So TWD changed its business model and allowed any grassroots organization or even any business to leverage our infrastructure to fundraise for whatever cause they wanted. I have small businesses that host bins to raise money for minor hockey. You know, I've got other franchises that are putting in several bins, you know, to fundraise for their favorite thing. And some small businesses that will allow us to rent space because they need the money just to monetize, you know, 4 feet of unused space. It's just a fiscally responsible thing to do. So they do that through us. So it doesn't matter who, we use our infrastructure to help them raise money. And then what we do is we collect those clothing and find a reuse market for it, whether it's local, which is always our priority, or abroad, especially in emerging markets. And we'll get to that as well later in the class. So that's what textile waste diversion does. So the way it works in Ontario is that most little charities will put out bins, or big charities, they put out bins or they host fundraisers or school fundraisers, and then they sell those clothes by the pound to a company like Textile Waste Diversion, where they might sell to Value Village or to Banks and Vogue. There's a few of us that buy clothing from charities. And there's usually like a standard rate, and that rate fluctuates because like any commodity, it fluctuates throughout the year based on, in part, supply and demand. So all of those regular parameters, economic parameters, apply to this industry as well. So basically the charities are the middlemen, and then the end market is, you know, the hauling companies that then export it, or companies like TWD will partner with an export sorter. They do the sorting and exporting, and then on all I have to collect. That's my job. Put out the bins, maintain the bins, and get the clothes where they need to go. And in it's a billion-dollar industry, so it's quite dynamic. There are some statistics that say that for every 1,000 tons that are collected, 7 direct and 15 indirect jobs are supported. So it's a vital employer. And given that 85% are still going to landfill, there's lots there that we can develop and grow in this industry and diversify. And we're going to talk a little bit about how regulations are impacting that goal or that development. Now, one of the big challenges we face, and you're learning about this because right now you're in the waste portion of your semester where you guys are focusing on waste. And my industry is famous for having to deal with waste, not only because waste is, you know, textile waste is my industry, but indirectly. So used clothing bins are famous for having a lot of clutter that accumulates around those bins, and some of it can be pretty crazy, and it's part of my business to have to deal with it. It's the cost of doing business. Now, when you're a for-profit company, that becomes a little bit more complicated when you're collecting versus being a charity that collects, because many charities that collect don't have to pay for dumping. They get dumping privileges for free. So it's actually in their benefit to dump things, which then, stagnates development in that industry and responsibility in that industry. They could just go there and dump. For profit companies like TWD or the sorting companies we partner with, we don't have that luxury. We have to pay for dumping fees. So it's in our best interest to find other things to do with this stuff than to actually bring it to the dump where we have to pay. So we would normally then seek out third-party recyclers. Some of them, like Cascades, they'll come and pick a whole trailer up of mixed stuff, and then they'll sort it and find end markets, just like I do with textiles. They'll do with the other stuff. Or we'll partner with other charities that might use some of the stuff that we collect. They can come and take first dibs, you know what I mean, before I put it into the trailer. So we all partner with third-party recyclers that manage all of that stuff, and they have an outstanding diversion rate. So it's not good when you leave it by a bin, because that is a problem for us. Even though we're working with these third-party recyclers, it's not a revenue stream for us. And actually, it costs us money in trucks and WSIB and all of that stuff for my staff. And it's a pain for my staff to have to lift this stuff that sometimes even, can be broken glass and things like that. When textiles, if that was all people were leaving by the bins, are not so difficult to pick up compared to, let's say, furniture and that kind of clutter. So it's a real problem for us, and that's one of the biggest problems we see in our industry. But that is the tip of the iceberg. The real waste problem we need to talk about in Canada is the not so great clothing, which now has become exasperated because of fast fashion. So let me give you an example of how this translates. You've learned a lot about fast fashion, I'm sure, being in the fashion sector, or sorry, being in the fashion faculty. But let me give you a practical example of how that impacted even the reclamation sector. So it used to be we collect all these old clothes from people, we sort them out, and you had a decent amount that were good enough quality that you could start selling locally in local thrift stores. And then anything that's kind of medium grade, we could ship to South America. And then anything that was kind of really low quality grade, we could ship to East Africa, because there was a market for that. And let me tell you how sad the situation is there for some people, is that they are so poor, they will buy the left shoe that is a dress shoe and the right shoe is a running shoe, and they'll buy that as a pair. So they've actually created a market for single shoes. That's how, or they'll buy those single shoes, tear them apart, and turn them into other things. So East Africa became where you sent all the stuff that you couldn't sell anywhere else. They would buy it and they would find a way to use it. And it's actually been named Africa grade. That's what they call it in the industry, Africa grade clothing. But that was, there was a portion of what we were collecting, but not all of it. Most of it we could either sell through local thrift stores, or we tore them down into mechanic rags. And then there was that portion that we sent to East Africa. Well, because of fast fashion, an item can only be washed 6 to 8 times, I think, before, it's usually no longer usable. So if you don't want it after 6 to 8 washes, do you really think your local thrift store wants it? Like, you can't sell Walmart type brands, you know what I mean, at Value Village. Like, you can't. Like, they need to sell an item that has a big enough margin to pay their rents and stuff. And people that are going to Value Village aren't going there to buy George brand, right? They're going there hoping they're going to find Lululemon at a good, rate, a good price. So with fast fashion coming in, we found the quality of our collections really, really degrading, where we weren't getting enough to take care of the Canadian thrift store market or to take care of the South American market, because it was more and more and more being Africa grade quality. So now East Africa sees this too. It says, hey, you guys are like bludgeoning us with this stuff, so much so that you're impacting our garment sector. Now, the garment sector is important because the garment sector has a 1 to 66 employment multiplication rate. So, okay, let's talk about that because last time I taught this class, some people got stuck on this. Your job multiplication factor. So, every time I hire somebody, right, that supports other indirect jobs. So, for example, my customer service person, right, she orders things from the printers, she goes to the local Tim Hortons on her lunch hour, you know what I mean? So, she is supporting other jobs. If a company hires enough people at their company, surrounding businesses will have to hire as well. The local lunch place may have to add another shift. You know what I mean? When the Toronto Food Terminal started to get really big and really busy, what did they do? They built a bank next door, they built a Tim Hortons and a Starbucks next door. You know what I mean? And they develop around it because that staffing can support other businesses, and that's the concept behind your job multiplication factor, that every job supports a certain amount of other jobs. So for example, when I first said that every 1,000 tons we collect creates 7 direct jobs. So that would be the people collecting the clothes, and then 15 indirect jobs. The person at the gas bar, because now there's more trucks on the road and they're using more gas. The local mechanic that has to work on those trucks, right? So all these other, the lunch guy, like I said, the local Tim Hortons, whatever, they're buying more coffee, more guys on the road. So it supports 15 other jobs. Well, your garment industry has a 66 1 to 66 ratio. So every job in the garment industry supports 66 other jobs. So when NAFTA came in, Canada used to have an amazing garment industry that some people blame NAFTA for killing. Well, when that industry fell, soon after it spiraled into a recession because 1 to 66 has a massive economic impact. So when East Africa is claiming that that's what we're doing to them, and I'm seeing that even my exporters, the companies I'm working with that are sorting for me, are saying, "Are you picking through the clothes? You must be picking the clothes. I'm not finding any good stuff. I'm not finding any name brands. Are you sorting through the clothes?" And I'm like, "How am I sorting a 30,000-foot trailer, 30,000-pound trailer by myself? Obviously, I'm not sorting the clothes. I'm arranging it for it to get delivered, and that's it." But the quality of what we're collecting has been so degraded because of fast fashion that my sorters have often accused us of sorting through it first because nobody buys good clothes anymore. You know what I mean? It's really, we have specific locations and condominiums on Bay Street that we sort for where you still get good clothes. But everywhere else, even in affluent neighborhoods, we're seeing a huge prevalence of fast fashion. And that has degraded the price of the commodity, which then reduces the profitability of the commodity. And also having that huge quantity being sent to East Africa because we haven't diversified that model has caused a huge impact on their garment sector, which, as we showed, actually impacts the rest of the sector, or sorry, the rest of their economy. So that's been a big problem. I would say that problem is bigger for this industry right now than the actual garbage that's left by the bins. Like I said, that we've been able to mitigate, but this commodity crisis, because of not just because of fast fashion, but definitely influenced or impacted by fast fashion, is not helping the situation at all. It used to be that people still had good quality stuff, so by the time it came to us, there was still a reuse value, and now it's not. So the rag market, like I said, some of them gets turned into mechanic rag. That's not like hugely profitable. You know what I mean? We're just covering the costs of the processing. But I have people to employ. I've got staff, I've got hydro, I've got square footage, all that stuff, the trucks, the gas, everything that I need to pay for, the licenses, the insurance, and everything. And I can't do that unless there's a margin for me to work with, which, with the price and the quality degrading, do you know, in some countries they won't even buy North American clothes anymore. There are many countries that are putting on a ban of Canadian clothing. So some companies will sell to a company in Europe who then resorts it in Europe so that they could claim that it's European clothes, because otherwise nobody wants it. So that's something that's really important to look at. Now, Ms. Rutherford also asked me to discuss business regulations. So, in the textile reclamation industry, regulations pertain mostly to the placement of bins. Now, there are depots and thrift stores that you can bring your clothes to, but research shows that the majority of people can't be bothered to make that extra trip. Use clothing bins that are strategically placed in areas that a local resident will go anyway, is far more likely to be used. So much so that even though we do bins and we do curbside collection and all these other things that we do, fundraisers and corporate fundraisers, 92% of all the clothing that textile waste diversion processes are actually collected from these community bins. So that's the preference. And that is where the regulations have come in terms of placement of these bins. Now, I was the first and for a long time the only one that was vocally supportive of industry regulations, and I lobbied very hard for them, and I got my way, and regulations swept the province. And I will say that it is the single biggest regret of my career. I've watched the industry get completely decimated from my support of regulations, and I wish I never did it. So let's unpack all the ways that municipality and regulations have butchered this industry, because this is important. Because what'll happen is you'll go into an industry very naive, think that the government putting in rules are going to protect you from the bad guys that break rules. And sometimes even the best written legislation is counterintuitive to what you're looking to do. And that's exactly what happened in the textile reclamation industry. And what it did was it paved the way for big money lobbyists to get their way and actually kill competition, which is essential to build innovation in an industry. So let's unpack all of that. So, and she also asked me to talk about the challenges working with government, and this all kind of ties in. So, textile waste diversion was the first to put in a curbside collection model for textiles for a municipality, and then that started to spread, and it became a thing. But what I'm learning is that textile waste, like I said, is a globally traded commodity. Okay, so it's very important for our economy in terms of, it's $1 billion industry, so it's vital, and it's part of our international trade. And somebody who's in a municipality, and it's the municipalities that determine things like local zoning, right? Where you can put things and stuff. They don't know anything about economic development. They're not looking at it from that standpoint. A municipal employee there's garbage to collect. How do we collect it? They're not looking at the ripple effect of their decisions. And sometimes a decision that's made on a very small, microscopic level municipally has a ripple effect that is catastrophic to international trade. Exactly what happened in this industry. So when I joined the industry, it was being bludgeoned by piracy. Piracy was rampant. They were powerful. Law enforcement didn't know how to handle it. And it became so overwhelming that it was just easier to say all companies are the same. And because police were saying that, then nobody trusted any company. The media started repeating that narrative. And then we couldn't get anybody to get involved in textile reclamation, which was again precipitating the whole crisis of our landfills getting to capacity, because all this stuff is being redirected to landfill. So now this is causing a massive crisis. We're missing revenue opportunities, and we're hitting capacity in landfills because of this issue. And the police now are making it worse, because they're discouraging regular companies and charities from partnering with reclamation companies, because they're saying all this stuff and the media's repeating it. So now we're really in a crisis. So I think, well, if we have regulations, then the cities can vet the organizations. If you meet the parameters, then you're good enough to collect. So therefore, people will be more apt to partner. And if we make the regulations strict enough, we can use those regulations to push the unsavory stakeholders out of the industry. What happened was, even in amazing written legislation, like Toronto has an amazing bylaw for textile bins, failed in enforcement. So Toronto, and Toronto's not the only one who made mistakes, by the way, but Toronto's a good example. So Toronto hired or signed what's it called, a bylaw officer, and his job was to go around to all the ones that have already been vetted and have proved to be okay, to make sure their stickers are still on the bin, make sure everything's okay, are all their licenses up to date. But they weren't doing anything to tackle the pirates, which was the whole reason this bylaw was created. So the pirates were allowed to continue collecting unencumbered, and they spent all their time harassing everybody that was following the rules. Now, those rules to follow are very expensive, which meant the pirates all this time were operating without these expenses. So now they got better locations and they're making more money than the charities that spent money to follow the rules. So now a year goes by, 2 years go by, and charities get sick of this. So they decide to stop paying. So a lot of them just stop renewing their permits. So now the city cracks down and says, okay, now everybody. So they start removing bins, including the pirate bins. So now the charities go back and say, okay, well, now that you're getting rid of everybody, now I'll pay for my permits. Well, the city says, not until you catch up on everything you didn't pay. So now you've got these tiny little charities needing to come up to 10,000, 20,000 just to bring them up to standard, because the city failed. In Waterloo wants to put in a textile reclamation program. They put out a bid for it and everything. But before they actually put one in place, they wiped everybody out. Everybody out. So all these years, these few years now that they're in this limbo space, all the clothes are going back to landfill. And when they put in their pilot project, it'll be a monopoly. And Markham. It's so funny. Markham was very selective on who got to be good enough to be part of the Markham group. Happened that all those charities, pretty much, or almost all sell to Value Village. But the little charities and organizations that were collecting for Value Village's biggest competitor, none of them got permits for some reason. And they've been squeezed out. Wow, that was convenient. And I bet you that the municipal rep that did that isn't even aware that she just got snowed into giving Value Village a monopoly on inventory in that neighborhood. So that and by the way, Value Village isn't even owned by a Canadian company. It's owned by a foreign-owned company called Savers that dominates in East Africa. And their biggest competitor that they just squeezed inventory from, Canadian owned. And Markham is targeting them and they don't even know they're doing it. So these are the mistakes that happen when you give municipalities power over the private sector through regulation. It's even the best intended regulation fails in enforcement, fails in economic development, because now what happens? So now right before these regulations happened, Talese, which is it's like a Value Village, okay, but they're Canadian owned, Talese, and they used to buy clothing from charities like Children's Wish. There was another one called National Thrift. There was a sorter that was also going to open a new chain of thrift stores, Canadian owned, and there's a store, Just Thrift in Toronto, that was about to start selling franchises, and they were going to spread. And all these Canadian owned companies have nicer branding, and better quality inventory. So they were coming in and making quite a dent, in that industry. And they were revitalizing the industry and bringing competition and diversity to this industry and really changing the face of the secondhand economy in Ontario. So it was a perfect timing. But that also meant that the Goliaths that are used to having a monopoly in this industry suddenly were being challenged. So when you're a $600 million company and you can afford lobbying, right, what ends up happening? Somehow all of the charities that collect for you somehow are all good enough to get permits and deals with the government and municipalities, and the Canadian-owned competitions of these Goliaths are put out of business. So these regulations that were supposed to protect honest diversity in this industry and protect integral players have actually been used by lobbyists to put Canadian businesses out of business or at least to stop any further development, or to stop diversification and competition in the industry. And you need competition to thrive. In Germany, when Germany decided to start looking at green tech and they wanted to diversify what happens with textile waste, the first thing they did was not invest in green technology. The first thing Germany did was invest in a government body that went after hidden monopolies. It's the first thing they did, is they went after hidden monopolies, and they gave grants and support to diverse private sector companies, small family businesses, to diversify and to expand on what they were doing. So what that created was an era of competition. So then everybody wanted to get the bigger grant or the bigger project or the bigger machine or whatever, and that created a robust green sector, um, secondhand economy. It actually created a manufacturing sector, because Europe has machinery, and now we're going to get into the green tech stuff. Europe has machinery that can make anything out of anything. Canada doesn't. So here's another example of how sometimes when the government gets involved, everything goes wrong. So in Germany and Europe in general, they realized that the government was going to screw it up, because the governments don't know how to develop sectors. We talked about that, like with the municipal stuff. So what they did was they got rid of anything that got in the way of private sector development, like the monopolies, the big lobbyists, all that stuff. They got rid of all of them. So now the private sector could be a real, true free market and start competing to create the best solution. Canada, 25 years behind the times, because we were monopolized by a sector that really profited off East Africa. We just send everything in East Africa. They buy everything, and never diversified, and actually maybe even discouraged any kind of development anywhere else. So now we're stuck with this model, and we've been stuck under this Goliath for the last 25 years, while Europe, built this whole industry. They take polyester fibers and they melt them down into pellets, and from those pellets they can make whatever. They take organic fibers, pull them apart, and then respool them, and now you got, what I mean, different kind of fiber you can use. And even I think Finland just came up with a technology that can separate blends. So now, whatever. So they've been doing all this stuff. So when TWD started researching green tech, I remember getting in touch with Europe, and Europe saying, because I would say, okay, so what do I do with cotton? What do I do with, polyester? And they were like, you're looking at this wrong. It's not about what to do with your textiles. We have a solution for all of that. You tell me what you want to make, and we'll send you the machines and tell you what kind of fabric to put in it, and then it's going to come out the other end, that thing. So you tell me what you want to make, and we'll send you the machines. What's Canada doing instead? Our genius liberal government has funded green tech research. For example, I had a college reach out to me today that the government's giving them money to buy a grinding machine. So see what comes out of this grinding machine. So I'm telling them, Canada already had a thriving shredding industry for textiles. We had 5 big ones, huge, that all they did was shred textiles, and they've all gone bankrupt because they can't sell the shred. The shred can't be sold because China creates new stuffing that's fluffier and nicer at half the price. So nobody's buying Canadian shred. They've all gone bankrupt. So why are you researching machines that have already been used, that have proved to be fiscally unviable? Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just call Europe and say, what can I make from my cotton? And they'll send you the machine. What's there for you to research? Like, we're reinventing how to boil water. Well, because, that's the way the government's stupid. And this is what happens. CWD's already done this research. The government's looking at what we've learned already doesn't work. You know what I mean? So when we're talking about green tech development, it takes intelligence. And it takes to see that other countries are already doing it. So let's talk to them. You know what I mean? Instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, let's go talk to a wheel maker and get her done. And this is why Canada is still 25 years behind the times, because we're only at the part where the government's been funding testing things we've already used that failed. You know what I mean? So this is why the industry is facing all of this problem, is the government has come in, and I'll tell you, just on a practical level, dealing with these people, they have to look. I'm a small family business. As an entrepreneur, I have a lot of freedom to do whatever I want, whenever I want, barring regulation. So whenever we want to make a change in my business or pivot my business, I can make that decision over lunch with my brothers. They're the board of directors. I sit down with my brothers, I make the case. In a matter of 3, 4 phone calls, we can restructure this whole business. But when you get to the government, there's committees about the committees and meetings about the committees, and then, like, working with municipalities that don't understand the industry, so their representatives don't know how to talk about what you're doing, so you got to talk about it for them. You know what I mean? So now you got to educate them in order for them to make a decision. They make dumb decisions, like in Markham, where Markham looks like they have this aggressive program, but Markham had a thriving, diversified industry. All Markham did was make a bunch of people lose their jobs so that Value Village can get a monopoly on inventory selection. That's all that Markham did. And they're only as much as they're collecting all this stuff, they're collecting half of what the industry was already doing before they got in there. So you have idiots like the one in Markham, what's her name? Claudia Marsalis, who created that great pathetic program, which was a failure, an economic failure, to the economy and to the industry, because all it did was remove diversity, remove innovation, and give a foreign-owned company an edge over Canadian-owned businesses. And it killed innovations, because all these other Canadian-owned businesses were about to open thrift stores in York Region that would have kept the clothes in York Region, would have kept the sorting jobs in York Region and everything else, and instead pushed them out, killed them all, just so that they can give these one flashy group, you know what I mean, the monopoly. So this is what happens when you get the government involved. So now, and the company that has the monopoly benefits from the East Africa domination thing, so they're not interested in green tech. So what are they going to do? They're going to say it's skeptical. So this is when you see the CBC start to push narrative. Like, they did an expose a while ago that was a travesty of journalism. And Kelly Drennan of Fashion Takes Action wrote an article called Fashion's Dirty Secret, The Whole Truth, and it unpacks the whole thing. So I urge you to read her article. It pokes holes in every single thing the CBC said. CBC has been misreporting on this industry, pushing the narrative of this foreign-owned Goliath. Oh, recycling's hard. That's why Canada doesn't recycle, because it's hard. It's not hard. It's not hard. It's expensive. It's a bit complicated now that we're 25 years behind the times, building an industry, diverse, robust industry from scratch when it's been unmined for 25 years. That's hard, but it can be done. Germany did it. All of Europe did it. We're the only ones not doing it. And the government being involved, the government can be hit by lobbyists. The government can be tricked and infiltrated by lobbyists. They can be spun a narrative that suits whoever, and they buy into it, and there's no accountability. The same Claudia Marsalis that came up with that ridiculous program in Markham, she pushed it and sold it to City Council, who put a stamp on it and agreed, and the media celebrates it. No one has ever said, wow, you're idiots. I've said it. Doesn't really do me much good in this industry. You know what I mean? So what it's done is it's made good, integral entrepreneurs the enemy. Good, integral Canadian businesses undermined. Because a foreign-owned entity has more money and they can lobby the government, and small family businesses can't. So that's what happens when you introduce regulation into an industry, from my experience. Has been the biggest regret of my career, honestly. And yeah, I think that's it. I think there's your class. So that's my soapbox. I hope you learned something good today. Entrepreneurism gives you freedom. Here, if you're going to take anything away from this practically, entrepreneurism gives you freedom. When you're an entrepreneur, as much as the big Goliaths, you can become a Goliath if you're good at what you're doing. You can become a Goliath and then you have power. But until you are, look, I still exist. I still make a good living, even though I'm fighting the undermining of these big powerful companies. They still can't get rid of me. I'm like a cockroach. They can't get rid of me. So when you have integrity and when you have passion, for me, this isn't a job. All their executives or whatever, they're just doing a job. This is my family's business. It's my livelihood. So my passion is in this. And as long as you have that, they can't kill you. So you're always in the game. And as long as you're still in the game, you're winning. And as an entrepreneur, you can be in the game on your own terms. You can live by integrity. And believe me, you can make a good living being integral. You don't have to go any other way. So when you can be an entrepreneur, you're free to be honest. This video I made, nobody in a big corporation or whatever would be able to speak this freely, but who's going to fire me? My father? Then he's going to have to port me. He's not going to fire me. You know what I mean? So being an entrepreneur, growing that innovation, being part of the diversity, there's a huge opportunity there for you, not just in textile reclamation, but anywhere. And you're in a business school, so learn about business and learn about growing your wealth and learn about all of those things and learn about taking, what other people view as waste and looking at it as a resource, and then leveraging every bit of that stuff like we do in this industry, where even, like I said, your sewing scraps get sold to cat toy manufacturers. You know what I mean? Find all your areas of waste, everywhere where you're leaking money, everywhere where you're leaking time or energy that doesn't have an ROI, and put that into your business, and you will survive anything. And then you'll be free and powerful to speak and make a difference. Because believe me, I'm a small family business, but in this industry, I make a difference enough that they've asked me to come and talk to you. So you can do that too. Have a great day, everybody.